Hi, this is Leighton Jen. I'm the Director of Development for the American Documentary and Animation Film Festival. We have a great program this year, and we have some great filmmakers. And today I have one of them, Susan Sandler, pardon me. And her movie is The Artist Must Grow Ever More Selfish. And this is a really fascinating documentary. I'll have Susan describe the film. Susan, thank you for joining us, and thank you for being a part of AmDocs this year.
Thank you, Leighton. I'm just delighted to be with you. This is a portrait of the American composer, writer, and gay icon Ned Rorem, who is also a very dear friend of mine. And this is a tribute to him and his early days in Paris. That's the whole envelope of this film.
And at what point did you imagine this being a project for yourself? Was this something you thought about early on, or was there something that struck you that inspired you to say, now's the time to do this?
Well, as I said, Ned was a dear friend and a neighbor of mine on Nantucket, where I live in the summer. And I invited him into a recording studio many, many years ago to read from this book, his Paris Diary, which was when it was published. This is the Paris and New York Diaries of Ned Rorem. It was explosive. It was very exciting reading and kind of scandalous and wonderful. And I loved reading it. He wrote 16 books. This particular diary has the intimacy of storytelling that I think is extraordinary. And I invited Ned into a recording studio in Nantucket many, many years ago to read from the diary. I had no vision of a film at the time. I just wanted to hear him read. Um, and whenever I would bump into him, he would say, "Put me in your movie, put me in your movie." That was always his cry. So um, years later, he died 2 years ago. He died in October of, when was it? He died in October of 22 at age 99. And
Wow.
like the rest of the world, mourned him and celebrated him and began to think about what I could do to tell part of his story. And I had, because of our friendship and my friendship with his family, I had access to his personal archive, which was extraordinary. He was a very, very beautiful man, particularly as a young man. And everyone wanted to paint him and photograph him, so his archive is full of beautiful images of Ned through the years. I was particularly interested in this period in Paris. He went to Paris as a young composer, and instead of behaving the way a lot of expats did, he planted himself right in the middle of the action. He didn't just hang out with the other expats. He went right to the heart of the most exciting people working in the arts in Paris in the 50s, and made himself part of that world immediately. He was very bold about putting himself in rooms with people he admired. And he ended up living there for 7 years as a house guest of the Comtesse Marie-Laure, after, anticipating a 6-month stay on a grant. So it's a very exciting diary full of the adventures that he had in Paris at this time and all of the amazing people who he met and who mentored him and who affected the work that he did. So the film is entirely Ned. We hear Ned's voice, we see Ned's images, and we hear his music. So it's a very immersive experience inside of Ned at this moment in his very exciting life in Paris.
I'm very excited. This sounds like an amazing project, an amazing tribute to an extraordinary man. Um, when you're putting this together, was there something you learned about him that maybe you didn't know ahead of time? I know you guys were very close friends. You probably knew a lot, but sometimes when you get in these processes, you discover something new. Was there anything that you discovered about him that you weren't aware of?
What was really interesting, the Library of Congress has an enormous amount of his material that has been collected over the years. There's a whole, you know, mine of Ned Rorem materials there. And it's not just music and it's not just writing. He created scrapbooks, which was something that people did at the time. These beautiful, large scrapbooks filled with everything from sketches on napkins to very intimate photographs and notes and clippings. So it's another kind of diary that was extraordinary to see. And you'll see in my film some of those images, some of the sketches that Ned made, some of the notes that he made, the letter that he wrote to Jean Cocteau, a very seductive little note, um, uh, with some very sexy pictures attached. So, the surprises were the extraordinary creativity in every corner of his life. Um, and what you see in all of his writing, particularly in his diaries, is very, very open. He lets you into his world, into his mind, into his adventures, into his insecurities, into every corner of his imagination. So this is someone who has been very accessible in the world for a long time through all of the writing that he's done. And it's interesting that there are almost two camps of people. There are people who know Ned as a writer and people who know Ned as a composer. And sometimes they are surprised by what they discover on the other side of his creativity. This film brings both together, I think, in a way that allows you to spend time with him very intimately.
Now, we're going to point out you're a screenwriting professor, right, over the Tisch
Yes.
School.
Hmm.
So when we talk about that, do you have plans to do anything more with him and his story, maybe as a fictionalized biopic or anything like that? Has that crossed your mind yet, or are we just so very early in this process of sharing him with the
um,
world?
yes, no, I think it would be a beautiful, beautiful film of the period from the point of view of Ned. It's a very ambitious period piece to make, and that journey to that from the documentary is, quite long. And I've thought about it, and and perhaps someone will approach me at some point, in the journey of this short film to offer some financing. That's
Yeah,
always the part of the story, right? Who's
right,
stepping
right.
up to the plate to say, let's do this.
Well, I hope so. So this is where I become the fanboy of this
Okay.
interview. One of my favorite movies, and I think it's one of the great romantic comedies, is Crossing Delancey, which she wrote first as a play and then they
Mhm.
turned it into a movie. Um, I love that movie. I think it's, like I said earlier, it's one of the best romantic comedies. I was talking to a friend or two since we agreed to do this interview, and they were thrilled that I was talking to you.
Oh.
Can you talk to me about the origins of that project and first as a play and then how it evolved into a film?
Mhm. Um, I wrote the play in the late 80s, and it ran off Broadway with a wonderful cast that included Shirley Stoller, who you may know from um, The Honeymoon Killers, as a kind of great character. She played the matchmaker. Um, the journey of the film, a lot of people came to see the play, which was very exciting. It had a great run. It was a limited run because that was the nature of the off-Broadway contract, the equity contract at the time. But a lot of filmmakers came. It was a period of time when there was a lot of plays to film was kind of one of the tracks that was happening. And Robert Altman sent a rep. One of the people who came to see it was Joan Silver, who, of course, I admired very much her work in Hester Street and Chilly Scenes of Winter. And we met, and she commissioned me to write the screenplay. And it was a pretty special experience because it wasn't just write and walk away. I had, originally offered the Pickleman role to Peter Riegert for the play off Broadway. He wasn't available. He talks about this in some of his interviews, but I said, well, maybe you'll do the film, which was a very cocky thing to say, for someone who was having a off-Broadway play produced to have that vision. But, we think very positively about our work. And in fact, when the time came to cast, Joan was with me all the way for Peter. I was very involved in the casting. I was very involved in the location scouting. We shot in my building. There's a scene in the film where you see Amy coming out of her door. That was my front door. We didn't shoot in my apartment, but it was literally my door. Um, so, aspects of the world were very much my world. It was highly autobiographical. So me going on the location scout was very smart because it was, had that authenticity. I was very involved in the casting beyond Peter. I held Rachel Bozic's hand for that audition. She was very nervous. She'd been recommended to me by my Yiddish teacher. I'd taken Yiddish classes at the Workman's Circle, and she was involved in a Yiddish theater there. So her name had come up, and I had recommended her to the casting director. So it was, from the beginning, a very unusual experience for a screenwriter to be so hands-on in the production of the film. And it was very smart of Joan to be collaborative that way. I think, it brought a lot of authenticity to every aspect of the film, and it was also joyful. My dad got to be in the film. There was a whole sequence that sadly didn't make it into the film, but I have the footage that was shot in a butcher store where Bubby takes Izzy to try to get her interested in the butcher because that was going to mean there was always going to be meat on the table when when you're married to a butcher. It was a very sweet scene, and we cast the two other butchers, to look like my dad, so it was kind of a terrific scene. Um, but altogether a very, very joyful experience. And the film has just been released by the Criterion Collection on a beautiful 4K edition. So I'm super happy about that.
Now I got to ask you, I know you said it's very collaborative. Obviously, Amy, I believe at the time was married to Steven Spielberg. Did he ever give any notes or any feedback?
He did. He did, in fact. He had a really interesting note for me about the scene in the restaurant where Izzy sets up her girlfriend to meet the pickle man. Um, and it was a really lovely, subtle note that he offered there that landed really well, and I appreciated that. And he was a great friend to the film. It was because of Stephen that the film went immediately to the head of Warner Brothers. It didn't go through any of the development tussle, that can happen when projects get torn in lots of different directions. It was very protected. And I think that saved so much of the authenticity of the film that it had Steve Ross's protection because Steven Spielberg said, this is a great project for Amy. Amy wants to make it. Let's make it happen. So, it just had this magic ride of great care and respect within the studio.
And it was a great showcase for Amy too. I really love that film. I watch it all the time, and it's one of those, later generations say, "Oh, you got to check out this movie" and stuff like that. And I was talking to my girlfriend about it, so we're going to watch it very soon. I don't think
Great.
she's seen it. Um, this is a documentary, and you've done some films. So, what kind of a transition has that been for you? Has it been a great transition? 'Cause this isn't your first documentary; you've done a few. Is there a big transition from going to screenwriting and working on film and plays to doing a documentary? And are there challenges involved with that?
I mean, I think, when I first started, I'm making a feature doc that is out now called Julia Scotti Funny That Way about comedian Julia Scotti that I worked on for 5 years, which is not unusual in the documentary world. Um, I was talking to one of the big funders in the doc world, and I said, my whole world is narrative world. I fiction. I know plays. I know fiction, and as a screenwriter, um, what advice do you have for me? And she said, story is story is story. If you're a good storyteller, you land very comfortably wherever you are, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And that's really been the template for me, is figuring out where the story is, where the emotional spine is of whatever it is that you make, as long as you're in touch with that, as long as you know the story that you're telling. And of course, documentary, you don't know what you're going to get. Life is messy. It's full of surprises. The film that I made about the comedian Julia Scotti, who is very much about her journey as a transgender comedian from the discovery of the identity to what happened. This was, very early in the period of understanding what gender dysphoria was, and she lost everything, contact with her family for 15 years, a very painful separation from her whole world. And the film follows her return to comedy and her children's return to her life. So it had enormous, enormous impact. As story, I had no idea what I was getting. You know, that's what your nerve endings tell you. I fell in love with her first as a performer. I fell in love with her as a human being. And I made the film with enormous tenderness and respect for her. And that's kind of where I come from a lot in, in my documentary storytelling. This film about Ned Rorem is also quite tender. It's very much about an appreciation of him, an appreciation of his worldview, of his talent, um, and I think when you have that affection for a character, regardless of fiction or nonfiction, you enter their world with a full embrace. And that's where I begin as a storyteller, with that embrace. I love my subjects. I want to enter their world, and I want to give them full reign to tell their stories. And that's what I approach everything that I do in that same spirit.
Well, that's beautifully said. I come from this. I'm part of this festival because, as a journalist. I was a journalism. I was a sports writer out here, and then I got to meet Teddy, and I started becoming involved with this. Not as a filmmaker, but I like to think supporting filmmakers,
Mhm.
and also the arts. So let's talk about the arts today. Obviously, in this day and time, the arts are facing a lot of challenges, but the arts are very important. Can you talk to me about how important art is today in the world we're living in right now and why
Mm.
it's crucial?
Yeah, of course it is, because art is truth. Art is where we live inside of our spirit, in our soul, in what makes life worth living, what we celebrate and around us. As you know, I teach at NYU in the film program, and I run a film festival there called Fusion, which is a festival that celebrates women and non-binary artists. And we just had a fabulous week just last week, so I'm just recovering from that. I know you can
Oh,
understand what that's like. And
congratulations, by the way.
thank you, thank you. Um, we lift up young artists, we lift up people who we admire, and what we learn from them every year at Fusion is everyone is entering a world that desperately needs the arts. As we move into this territory now where there is so much um, othering of people and so much pushing away of anything that's different. Everything that we do in the arts that celebrates our differences, that embraces our differences, that brings us all together in the human family. That's what we do in the arts, that unites us as a human family. It's critically important. So what you do at AmDocs is vital and beautiful, and we're really honored to be with you. I think making art accessible is very, very important, so that it's not an exclusive territory, that everyone can see the work, that everyone can join in the celebration, I think is also really important. So the festival that we do at NYU is all free. I know everyone can't do that, but we celebrate that, and we invite the community to come, and we have sellouts, of course, at that. I see that AmDocs is very affordable, which is a really good thing, that you and Teddy keep things accessible in that realm. But I think across the arts, expanding our communities is really important, and not making it an experience that only a few people can enjoy, but making it really accessible. And that's what my students at Tisch are doing. They're bringing a lot of their work in as many forms as possible to as wide an audience as possible in the most accessible way imaginable. I think that's where we want to head in the future with all of our crafts.
Yeah, coming from a journalist standpoint, I'm trying to encourage a lot of the kids. We have some student programs, and I encourage them that, with cell phones and technology today, it's more accessible, more available for them to tell their stories. And I like to say that you have a voice. We'll give you the platform to tell your stories. And I'm very proud of our student projects because we have high school kids who tell these little documentaries, and how some of these students open up, and the way they tell their stories is
Mhm.
extraordinary, from someone who's never made a film before, but but we've given them a platform to open up, and I think that's very powerful. I think what you've done is very powerful. I mean, I'm still talking about your film, what, 30, 40 years later? It still touches me. Um, as a teaching screenwriting, um, what have you learned from your students, and how do they inform you as a screenwriter now and a
Yeah,
filmmaker?
what a good question. I learn from them every day. And I think, the world that they're entering is challenging. The industry is changing. That's the mantra now. How are people going to react to that? How is the world going to be making opportunities for filmmakers? And I think the story is always that we make opportunities for ourselves. We figure out who our community is, who we want to work with, and we make things happen for ourselves. I'm very excited by the idea of where vertical drama is going to go. Right now, that world is exclusively in a kind of genre that doesn't appeal to me, the short form, very, almost soapy kind of hooks. But I think it's going to turn a corner. And I think there's going to be, in the very near future, a sophistication that's going to enter the vertical world. I think it has to happen. People walk around with that instrument all the time. The whole evolution of podcasts as an addiction, right? And the sophistication of what that's become. I think there's going to be a real revolution now in sophisticated storytelling in vertical drama. I think it's going to be affordable. I think interesting writers are going to enter it. I think the unions are finally going to, that's one of the real, holding points. The Writers Guild and the actors unions are very resistant because it's right now a lot of people are being taken advantage of who are working in that form. They're not being paid fairly. The working conditions are not great. This is what I'm hearing from people who are working in that world. And I know some writers who are writing in that, some of my former students who've taken jobs in that world who have not had good experiences because of that kind of abuse. And
Mhm.
actors who are overworked and people on sets who are not getting paid. All of that has to be pushed away and it has to become um, fair and what people should be well compensated. But I think the audience is going to be there. And I think it's going to open a lot of opportunities for distribution of films that are going to take different forms because of, the constrictions of what that vertical screen is. But I think it's going to be exciting. I've already started to think about a project that I want to do in that form. So that's kind of what's on my plate right now, as I'm thinking towards that.
Oh wow, that's really exciting. I haven't really kind of thought about the vertical form yet. I just keep thinking, all right, I got to edit this down and center it on a vertical. But no, you're absolutely right. It really is changing, and technology is changing. It makes it more accessible to everyone. Um, that's about all I have for you today. Is there something
Great.
I might have missed that you would like to share with us?
No, I just want to send big love to everyone at this festival. I wish I could be with you. I'm so sorry I can't, but I'm with you with this film that carries Ned Rorem's spirit and voice and music and images. Um, the artist must grow ever more selfish. A thought that comes from Jean Cocteau, who we meet in the film, and it has, I think, a real impact as we think about art and stories that we want to tell. So please enjoy it and have a lovely, lovely festival. My dear thanks for bringing it to your audience.
And I think you might have mentioned earlier, but I'm going to bring it up again. Pulitzer Prize winner. So I'm very jealous because I've never had an opportunity to win a Pulitzer. I won one award, which I'm very proud of.
Yes.
As a reminder, the American Documentary Animation Film Festival coming up quickly, March 25th to 29th, Palm Springs Cultural Center, www.amdocfilmfest.com. We're looking forward to your film. Thank you so much for being with us,
Thank
and
you.
thank you for
Mwah.
the wonderful art you shared with us. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much, Leighton. Bye bye.
Bye.